Most small towns you visit are normal. A vast majority you probably encounter and maybe even live in are, for the lack of a better word, normal, easygoing. But there are some towns out in the heart of America and all across the world that hold dark secrets. Such is the tale we are going to talk about today. I speak, of course, of the supposed curse of Raven's Fair. Raven's Fair was once a very productive, a booming town that eventually fell to disarray. And some would say that there was a curse upon Raven's Fair that occurred in the highs, the peak of this town's existence. Welcome back, dear listener, to another episode of The Monsters We Make. I am your host, Mr. Multiverse. And as always, these stories are not for the faint of heart. So if you wish not to subject yourself to such a strain, now's your chance to, well, we warned you. This is probably the most recent of our stories. This involves the tale of not just the fall of Raven's Fair, but also it involves a very bizarre murder that happened not just there, but it also involves a family, or the makings of one, I should say. Our story begins on March 16th, 2007. Our main focus of this tale, and his family by and large, is Jamie Ashen. Jamie Ashen, shown here in this image. Jamie Ashen was part of a very powerful family, or once powerful family, I should say, in the town of Raven's Fair. He lived under a very overbearing father. His father, of course, after his mother had passed, had gone through several wives, divorcing them quickly after a quick love affair. Edward Ashen, his father, was, by all accounts, a stern and often depicted as, or said to be, cruel man. I can neither confirm nor deny those reports, but speaking as a man with his own family issues, I can agree. Now, Michael Ashen had left Raven's Fair years ago, and he left with his longtime girlfriend, now wife, Lisa. Lisa and Jamie had basically bought a apartment in a nearby city. Now, they were, by all intents and purposes, by all accounts, from friends within the city. It was said that they were very much in love. They cared for one another, and there were even talks of wanting children. But that changed one night. On March 16th, Jamie Ashen and Lisa Ashen were given an anonymous gift, according to police, a quote-unquote anonymous gift, according to police reports. I say police reports because, according to Jamie, during the investigation, Jamie said that he went out to get Chinese takeout for he and Lisa that night when they got a doll, this ventriloquist doll named Billy. When Jamie returned home, he found that the lights were off, and he could hear Lisa's voice from the bedroom. But according to him, when he returned to the bedroom, he found Lisa Ashen's body. Coronary reports state that Lisa Ashen's lower jaw had been completely torn off, and that her tongue was removed and missing. It also is interesting, as a little note from the coroner, it looked as though she had been scared to death, judging by the expression. Now, this is the puppet that was found, Billy. Now, during this investigation, Jamie Ashen was, of course, the prime suspect, and that was the case with Detective Jim Lipton. Lipton, according to many of his co-workers at the police force, said that Lipton was a fine officer. He was a great detective, but he did have a very crippling flaw. That flaw being that he was essentially, once he thought he had a prime suspect, he didn't let it go. And of course, the prime suspect was Jamie Ashen. Let's actually talk about Jamie's Jamie's alibi, and also his wife's murder that really snowballs into the rest of this into this case. Now, Jamie, according to him, as I said, was given the Billy doll, as you can see in that picture, in the hands of Detective Lipton. In Lipton's report, Jamie had told him that, again, he went out to get Chinese takeout, bring it back at roughly the same time, and in that time frame, it's roughly in that same time frame as the murderer. So let's say there is another killer in this scenario. The time it would take to break into the house, into the apartment, excuse me, attack Lisa, do the damage they had done to her, and remove her tongue, and then leave no other fingerprints or any other sign of a struggle is very difficult to say. In fact, there were no other fingerprints. The police swept the entire apartment building. They found no other fingerprints other than Jamie and Lisa's. Now, now you can make the argument, if this killer was as smart as they probably were wearing gloves and were very meticulous. But the sheer brutality of Lisa Ashen's death, it leaves a lot to be desired in that regard. But then again, why would Jamie kill his wife? Again, I have to state that according to friends, Jamie and Lisa were very much in love. And again, the brutality of it, as the coronary report stated, the bottom jaw was removed, as was the tongue. But again, to do that, you would need an incredible amount of strength. It wasn't pulled off by some tools. According to the coronary, it would have to have been done by someone incredibly strong. And while, yes, Jamie was arguably probably stronger than Lisa, it's very important to include that, like, no human is that strong. So Jamie took Lisa's body back to Raven's Fair. Now we come to Raven's Fair itself. Raven's Fair, as it was called, a quiet place to live. According to many, it was a boom town back in the 1920s. There was a massive theater. The town was actually a very beautiful place, according to many of the old timers, but the economy crashed, roads changed, geography changed, but the town didn't change. This also leads to Jamie returning not just home, but he returned to see that his father, Edward Ashen, shown here in this picture, had remarried again to Ella Ashen. Now, Ella, we don't know much about her. There's very little records about Ella. In fact, there's literally, other than she's married to Edward, she was the third wife to Edward. We really don't have a lot of information about her. She just showed up and became part of the family. She was admittedly attractive, and maybe Edward Ashen, who apparently had suffered, according to reports from the locals, that he had suffered a stroke, maybe, and she was acting as a caregiver. Maybe they just fell in love from there. Now, according to some people, Jamie did go to see his father in order to tell him the news that his daughter-in-law had been killed, and that he was interring the body at the Walker Funeral Home. The Walkers, Henry and Marion Walker, were a married couple who ran the, of course, funeral home. It was a family business. Henry's father had built it as his father before him. It was basically 3 generations of a funeral home. Henry dressed the body, she was buried, and that should have been the end of it. But for some reason or another, Jamie Ashen decided to stay in Raven's Fair. And according to some reports that were found of Detective Lipton, he was on a hunt for something. He was on a quest, a mad quest to supposedly find his wife's real killer, who was still out there. Jamie, by Lipton's personal logs, was very much obsessed with finding his wife's killer, even though all evidence was pointing to him for some reason or another. Now, let us return back to the doll, Billy. Billy the doll was actually, as I said, a ventriloquist dummy, and it belonged to a woman named Mary Shaw, who is infamous in Raven's Fair. Now, these reports have come to light only recently, so I must stress that this is a very brutal subject that we are about to discuss. Mary Shaw was a very talented ventriloquist. She was performing at the Raven's Fair theater every weekend. During one show, however, her performance was heckled by a young boy, Michael Ashen, Jamie Ashen's great uncle, and also Edward Ashen's uncle as well. According to those that night, Michael Ashen heckled and harassed Mary Shaw to the point where Mary Shaw herself had to prove that she was as good a ventriloquist as she was. Of course, Michael Ashen did stay quiet after that, but afterwards, shortly after that performance, Michael went missing. Michael Ashen vanished, and there was a search party for days. But after a while, people started to suspect that Mary Shaw had a hand in Michael's disappearance. So one night, an angry mob broke into Mary Shaw's home, dragged her out of her home, and after an intense interrogation, cut out her tongue and murdered her. Mary Shaw was then interned at the Walker Funeral Home, where, as the stories say, she requested to be made into a doll, for she had no children of her own, and treated her dolls as children. There were even talks that Mary Shaw believed that she could create the perfect ventriloquist dummy. No, that was more of a rumor than anything else. Nothing could be truly proven outside of the scary stories. But after Mary Shaw's passing, it seemed as though the curse of Raven's Fair reared its ugly head. Some would say that the economic downturn of Raven's Fair was Mary Shaw's fault for the wrongful death, for Michael Ashen's disappearance. Michael Ashen's body was never found. I should also mention, there were no police reports. In fact, some were scrubbed, and in fact, like I said, they only now came to life only several years ago of what had happened to Mary Shaw. Getting back to Jamie Ashen, Detective Lipton, in his reports, followed him to a small motel where he was staying in town. Lipton reportedly had a room next door where he would hear Michael thrash about as if something was trying to scare him. According to Lipton's personal logs, it was said that Jamie Ashen had become disheveled, he had become erratic, believing that this doll was to blame, or at least Mary Shaw herself. Now, We don't know what happened next in this time frame, but what we do know is that sometime during Lipton's pursuit of Michael Ashen, Henry and Marion Walker were murdered in similar fashion as Lisa Ashen. We don't know how that happened. Again, but the deaths of both of the Walkers was incredibly similar. Jaw ripped off, tongues missing, and this happened shortly after Jamie had returned home. Now, by this point, the last report we know of Michael Ashen, according to Detective Lipton, is that Lipton followed Jamie into the theater for answers. The two of them went into the old Ravens Fair Theater and never came out. Lipton never came out. Jamie, on the other hand, was seen by several members in town driving back to the Ashen house, to the Ashen estate, where shortly thereafter, Edward Ashen and Jamie Ashen went missing. We don't know what happened to the last of the Ashen family. In fact, but what we do know is that the theater within it had several, according to police who combed the area, found several broken dolls that were destroyed by shotgun blasts. It's a rather strange case. Was there a scuffle between Detective Lipton and Jamie Ashen? Or was there someone in the building? I should also point out that the deaths of Henry Walker, according to coroner reports, doesn't fit the timeline. And also, this time around, Jamie Ashen actually had a solid alibi for their deaths. He was not there. In fact, Jamie Ashen himself heard the voice of Henry Walker, according to reports that he had gotten a call from Henry. But in that time frame, the deaths of the Walkers had already occurred. It really makes no sense of that this strange string of events of the Ashen family befell upon them. There's really makes no sense. Just out of the blue, if we were to go with the assumption that Jamie Ashen killed his wife, why? And then we come back to why did not only Jamie go missing, but also his father and also Ella, the latest wife of Edgar. Again, there were there was nothing known about Ella. She just appeared out of the blue. Now, you could make the argument that maybe, just maybe, she married, and this could actually be very true. There was no maybe about it, that perhaps maybe she wanted to get the Ashens, despite the downturn of the Ravens Fair, were still pretty wealthy. They were a very influential family. And keep in mind, Ella vanished, same as Jamie and Edgar. But if we were to go by the theory of Ella murdering the Ashens, who killed the Walkers in the same fashion as Lisa Ashen? That made no sense to anyone, that it was a exact copy of those murders, and that was kept by the police in the metropolitan area. There was no sharing between Ravens Fair police reports. Now, you could make the argument that maybe there were details that Henry Walker found and the killer thought it would be fun after seeing those reports, but that's very unlikely. To do it so perfectly and no sign of a struggle. There were, again, when the Walkers' bodies were finally found, no fingerprints, no sign of a struggle. They were both found underneath the house. Now, Marion, I should also mention, Marion Walker suffered from a mental illness that made her rant and rave about the curse of Ravens Fair, about Mary Shaw. Of course, it was in coronary reports, it was a brain disease that she was already dying from before the actual murder. Henry was doing his best to take care of his wife, but she would often slip into the cellar, underneath the house, to basically hide, quote unquote, hide from Mary Shaw. I think the most important thing about this is that there is so much evidence to incriminate so many people at once in this scenario. Was Jamie Ashen guilty of killing his wife? It's hard to say. The time frame matches up, but why would you go back to the scene of the crime when it was so when you put it so meticulously together? Was there an accomplice? It's not out of the question to have a hired hitman. And was this all just a string of coincidences? But we go back again to the whole ordeal with Mary Shaw. It's rather fascinating that this whole thing also revolved around Mary Shaw herself. That this woman who, for all intents and purposes, was horribly murdered by a angry mob for no reason. And again, I must stress that Michael Ashen's body was never recovered. It was never found in Mary's house. Now, yes, I will admit, you could easily make the argument that Mary Shaw hid the body somewhere else if he did kill him. But you have to remember, Mary Shaw was an elderly woman who couldn't really get around much. How could she break into the Ashen estate house, avoid all the guards, kidnap a boy who she'd probably have trouble struggling to bring back to her house, kill them, and then basically hide the body by yourself? Mary had no relatives. She had no real friends, so it would be hard to say for an accomplice. And again, let's go back to Jamie and Detective Lipton. Why did Lipton follow Jamie into the theater willingly? In his report, he said he was ready to finish this once and for all. But did Jamie just lure him there, saying there's evidence in the theater? And did Jamie kill him? I don't know. And just hide the body, because again, we never found Detective Jim Lipton's body. It was just, he was never found. And then Jamie drives back, and then he goes missing. I have heard a theory that perhaps, maybe, just maybe, that maybe the Ashens were tired of Raven's Fair, and Ella, Edgar, and Jamie all departed from Raven's Fair to start a new life. I've heard that one before several times over. But why also, why would the Walkers be killed? They were doing a service. Did they know something that would have held back the Ashens, if we're to go by, if we are to believe if we were to believe that theory, then why kill the Walkers at all? And in such a similar fashion as a calling card of Jamie Ashen, who, again, I must stress, was already still under investigation. So why repeat that kill again if you know you're going to be on the run? It's incredibly difficult to say how all of this, and you keep getting back to Mary Shaw. Was it just a convenience if we go by the theory that the Ashens planned all this? But what would Jamie have to gain from this? He never cared for his father. Or did he go back and finish the job to kill both Ella and Edgar? Or was he involved with his stepmother? It's incredibly the more answers you want to get, there's 1,000 more questions along the way with this case. It's really difficult to really hold down or pinpoint where exactly Jamie Ashen could have killed these people. Lisa, you can make the distinction. Lipton, you can make the distinction. Edgar and Ella, you can make that distinction. But again, we go back to the Walkers and their murders. Now before anyone says in the comments, "Oh, Ella could have done it." No, for all their reports are, Ella was at home with Edgar at the time of the murders. You could say that maybe they hired a killer. They could hire a hitman, but to be that thorough and clean is rather difficult to say. Like that is a nigh impossible feat, if I'm being honest. Ravens Fair sits today dilapidated and near collapse. No tourism, no economic help. And one day Ravens Fair will vanish with time. As will the unsolved murders of Lisa Ashen and the Walkers and Detective Jim Lipton. So, I leave with all of you. Oh, actually, before I go, there is another thing that occurred during these murders that again ties back to the quote unquote curse of Ravens Fair. During that time frame, Mary Shaw had been buried with all of her dolls ages ago as a last part of her last request, not only to have her body be made into a ventriloquist dummy, but also be buried with her dolls. The dolls were all dug up. Every coffin was dug up, and all the dolls were missing. No one knows how that happened. Everyone who could have done it were far from the area at the time of the desecration, I guess you could call it. So who the hell took the dolls? So I leave it up to you. Did Jamie Ashen murder? Was he a murderer? Or was there something else more supernatural at work here? Before I go, dear listener, I would like to bring up one more thing in regards to Ravens Fair. You see, in Ravens Fair, as I said, they treat Mary Shaw as the boogeyman. And there is a poem that I wish for you to listen to before you go. The children used to sing it after. We'll speak of it as an urban legend. There, the stare of Mary Shaw. She had no children, only dolls. And if you see her, try not in your dreams, be sure you never, ever scream, or she'll rip your tongue out from the seam. Until next time, dear listener, I am Mr. Multiverse, and here's to a new world of gods and monsters.